What's up, YouTube? I'm Guy, and today on the channel we're going to check out the new Seiko Cocktail Time, reference SRPB43. I say new, although this watch came out at last year's 2017's Baselworld as a replacement for the existing Seiko Cocktail Time, which was reference SARB065. Now, that original Cocktail Time watch, which I've reviewed in the past, and if you want to go back into my library and check that out, was a watch that is beloved by, I don't know, thousands, tens of thousands, maybe millions of people. It's a really well-regarded dress watch, probably an all-time Hall of Fame watch for a lot of people. In my review of that watch, I was fairly complimentary of it, although there were a few little things that I didn't like about it, namely the size and the proportions, but overall an excellent watch. Now, I was offered to have this Presage Cocktail Time watch on loan, and I thought to myself, do I want to review essentially the same watch again? And I thought, yeah, there's a few differences between that watch and this watch, and it might be interesting to check this watch out and see how it stands up to the one that I reviewed in the past. Unfortunately, I don't have that watch. That one was also loaned to me, so I can't set them side by side, but I remember most of the specifics about that watch pretty well, and I'm fairly confident that in looking at this new Presage watch, I'll be able to compare them and give you guys my basic opinion on the things that they changed, if it was for the better, and sort of, I guess, revisit this watch, because it is very similar, with only some minor variations, although some of them are not quite insignificant. In particular, they changed the movement from the old SARB065 into this new watch. It's honestly a little bit of a lower end movement, but we'll get into that when we dive over to the tabletop and look at this watch more closely. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and jump to the tabletop, give you guys a nice close look at this watch, and then we'll come back over here and I'll give you my closing thoughts. Alright guys, we're going to go ahead and dive over here and take a close-up look at the Seiko Presage Cocktail Time, reference SRPB43. Retail price on this, or list price, $425, although I certainly have found it online for cheaper than that. Probably in the range of $325 to $375, depending on the vendor. So don't pay list price if you can help it, but expect to pay somewhere in the ballpark of plus or minus $350 for this watch. The dimensions of the case on this watch are 40.5 millimeters in diameter, not including the crown, 20 millimeter lug width here where the strap attaches, 12 millimeters in thickness, and a lug-to-lug or overall wingspan of the watch from edge to edge is 47 millimeters. This watch is, of course, as previously mentioned, a successor to the SARB065 Cocktail Time, and how that differs from this watch are in a few key areas. Number one, the thickness. This watch being 12 millimeters thick is 1 millimeter thinner than the old SARB 065. That watch was 13 millimeters thick. Another difference about this watch is the crown over here at the 3 o'clock position. This crown is a little bit different. It's a little bit oversized in comparison to the previous version. Not really a good or a bad thing in my opinion. This crown looks nice. It's obviously functional. There's nothing wrong with it. But it is a little bit different for some reason. It's a little curious why they made these subtle little changes. Another subtle little change that they made was to the dial. You can see that the markers here are all one-piece applied markers in a really nice high-polished stainless steel. On the old version, all of the odd numbers, not including the 3, 6, 9, and 12, not numbers but markers, were two-piece applied indices or applied markers, whereas these are single one-piece triangular markers. So another strange but small and somewhat curious change that they made to the watch. Probably the most notable difference between this and the previous version, the SARB 065, is that this uses the 4R35 movement as opposed to the 6R15, which is a slightly more high-end or slightly better movement in my opinion. It had a longer power reserve and it had a slightly better accuracy range from the factory. The final difference between those two watches, this SRPB43 and the old SARB 065, is the text down at the 6 o'clock position of the dial. This of course says Presage Automatic. The old version used to say Automatic in kind of a fun, playful cursive font, and then below the automatic text it said the joule count of the movement. But those are really the only differences. I guess there's maybe one more, the price. I think the original list price on the old Cocktail Time was about $50 higher than the list price on this watch, which is not significant. Probably the reason that it was a little bit more expensive is because it had that slightly more high-end or slightly better movement in that old watch. So perhaps downgrading this to the 4R series movement was a cost saving, for reasons of cost savings, and also it could be because that older watch, using that different movement, it had to be a little bit thicker to house that movement, whereas perhaps this watch is thinner with this 4R series movement in it. Besides that though, more or less we have almost identical watches, and my previous review that I did on that SRP 055 or 065 rather was, very favorable. I liked that watch quite a bit, and this watch obviously I like quite a bit as well. Now the other basic specifications or features of this watch includes a domed sapphire crystal, which you can see here if I show the watch in profile. It's a great crystal. It's Hardlex. Did I say sapphire? Of course I meant Hardlex. Seiko's proprietary Hardlex crystal. It's a great domed crystal. It looks fantastic, and if you hold it at just the right angle, you get this nice little distortion effect as you look through the glass to the face of the dial. We also have an exhibition case back, and inside there you can see the 4R35 Seiko movement. The rotor on this movement is gold toned. Perhaps it's made of brass. I'm not entirely certain what the material is, if it's just some sort of applied finish or an actual, brass rotor. But regardless, that's really the only decoration other than the text, Seiko Time Corp, Seiko 23 Jewels, etc. This watch does have a signed crown, and I did mention that this crown is a little bit different than the old version in that it's a bit oversized, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. On one hand, for dressier watches, I would probably prefer a slightly more undersized or refined crown, but this one is nice. I like the shape and the style, and the texturing on it is quite good. Manipulating the crown is, easy, of course. It's not a screw-down crown, so spinning the crown to wind the movement, works perfectly fine. That it's not a screw-down crown, it's also interesting to note that it is still 50 meter water resist, and while the vast majority of us are never going to take our dress watches in the pool or the ocean or swimming or whatever, it's nice to know that it can certainly withstand, common everyday occurrences like rain or, getting splashed while washing your hands and whatnot. The last feature of this watch is this black leather strap with blue contrast stitching and a pretty nice dual button deployant clasp. I'm a big fan of these style of clasps, and as you can see, you push those buttons and it folds open, but it retains its position on the strap with this hinged clasp portion. Putting it back on, super simple, locks in, and you got your dual keepers there. Now, again, I had mentioned one of the big differences between this and the previous generation Cocktail Time watch is the movement. This one uses the 4R35 movement, whereas the older version used the 6R15. The 6R15 is, it's not even an argument. It was a better movement. It had a longer power reserve. It had a better accuracy range from the factory. So it's a little bit of a disappointment that they downgraded to this movement, although if it was to save a little bit of cost, if it was to get that case a little bit thinner, it's probably worth it. The 4R35 movement is a 23 jewel movement with a 41-hour power reserve. It runs at a beat rate or vibrations per hour of 21,600. It is of course hand winding and hacking. It does feature a date complication at the 3 o'clock position, and from the factory it has an accuracy range of between minus 20 seconds per day to plus 40 seconds per day. Speaking of hand winding and hacking, we did illustrate you can hand wind the movement by spinning the crown, and if you pull the crown out to the first position, you can quick set the date. At the second position, it halts the movement, and of course, you can set the time here however you would like, and push the crown back down to start the movement back up and get the watch running again. I am, more or less a fan of all of Seiko's movements. Their 7S series is not hand winding and hacking. I would prefer that they use at least this 4R series of movement of all of their watches, and hopefully sometime in the near future we'll find this movement or the better 6R15 in all of their watches, not just the Presage line. But, I digress. It's nice to see that at least this is using a hand winding and hacking full-featured movement. Now, moving right along, the thing that everybody loves about this watch, and I'm no exception, I said as much in my original Cocktail Time review of the SRB 065, is the dial. Everybody loves this dial. It's this beautiful kind of radiant sunburst dial, and as I kind of rotate it around and catch different angles of light, you can really just see how extraordinary this dial looks. It's fantastic. It's, it's one of a kind, and it's the reason why this is considered a Hall of Fame or all-star watch for a lot of collectors. I love it too. Something that I don't love about it, though, is the overall size, and I said as much in my previous review of the old version of this. It's just a little bit too big. If you look at the proportions of the case, and I'll try to kind of get it back here a little bit, everything is fairly small and understated. We have these nice, thin, delicate lugs. We have a very understated bezel, and then it's all, just dial, basically. That's what draws your eye in, is this dial. I understand why they did that. I understand why they made the case less of the main feature of this watch. It's because they want to attract the attention to this beautiful dial. So while I like the proportions and the design, the overall size is just a hair too big for me. I prefer my dressier watches like this to be probably in the 36 to maybe at most 38 or 39 millimeters. Preferably 36 or 37 though. For somebody with a little bit bigger of a wrist, I suppose 40.5 millimeters isn't going to be much of a problem. But that's just my personal taste. That's what I would prefer. Other than the fact that I feel like it's a little oversized, though, I think this is just about perfect, with one other minor exception, and that is this strap, which we will talk about, and it's not a bad strap, actually. A lot of people dislike this strap. We'll touch on that in a minute, though. But other than that, this is really an outstanding, borderline perfect watch. There's really not much to dislike about it. The case itself, well, I said, the proportions, it's all really nice, albeit a little bit too large. The finishing is excellent. Every single surface, be it the tops of the lugs, the sides of the case, every surface on this thing is a nice high polished, and it looks outstanding. Generally speaking, I like a case that has a mixture of both brushed and polished surfaces, but on this watch, that everything is polished works perfectly. There's no complaints from me about that aspect of this watch. Now, the dial, again, we looked at it. It is this beautiful radiant sunburst kind of effect in silver. They have it in a couple of other options as well. I believe they have a nice dark blue version, and I want to say like a chocolate brown or something. I don't remember. It was a third option that it didn't exactly appeal to me, and I haven't spent a lot of time looking at that one. But yeah, I thought it was like a chocolatey brown version. This one, of course, is the silver version. Just absolutely outstanding. Now, all of the markers are really high polished, excellent applied indices or markers. They do differ from the old version. These are one-piece markers instead of the two-piece markers. I don't think it matters one way or the other. It's a little interesting that they decided to make that change, but this looks, at a quick glance, it looks almost identical. I can hardly tell a difference. But if you scrutinize them up really closely by one another, you can notice that these markers are a little bit different, but they still are excellent. They look good. It works perfectly with the watch. The handset is also great. It's got this high polished sort of stiletto, almost dagger-like hands, and I'll try to get in here nice and close and catch some angles of light. You can see it has two edges, and as the light passes past those different edges, you can see that it reflects and catches light just perfectly. It makes it legible in basically any light other than, total darkness. There is no lume on this dial whatsoever, so if you're in total darkness, you're not going to be able to read the watch. But in just about any other light, the way that it catches and reflects that light is really outstanding with those kind of dual-faceted stiletto or almost dagger-like hands. The second hand is interesting in that it's really the only thing that's not monochromatic on this watch. It's sort of got this little sewing needle eyelet over on the counterbalance side, and it's a nice, rich, deep, dark, royal, almost blued finish. It runs all the way out to the chapter ring, just touches the very, very tips of those graduations or hash marks on the chapter rings for the seconds. It's executed pretty much perfectly. The only other feature of the dial probably to point out is the date complication over at 3 o'clock. It's a white date disc with black text. It looks fine. It's outlined, framed, if you will, with another highly polished stainless steel applied aperture, I guess is what I would call that. And then I guess we also have the applied Seiko marker up at the 12 o'clock side of the dial. Overall, the whole presentation, the style, the aesthetic, it's fantastic. Everybody loves this watch. It's no secret why. Now, the last thing to touch on this watch is this black leather strap. A lot of people don't like it. If you look around online, on forums, message boards, Facebook groups, people talk about this strap, it's very unfavorably. The main complaint, and yeah, I agree, is that it's really glossy, as you can see there, as it's reflecting my studio lights. It's not as bad as all of that, if I'm being honest. The thing that I didn't like about it in my first review of the original Cocktail Time watch was that it had a lot of padding here in this area, but on this strap it's very much more subtle. I don't know if they toned it back, or if because this one that's on loan to me is kind of worn in, maybe it's not as prominent, but the padding here in this section is not as bulky. So that was one of my complaints about the strap, that it's a little glossy. Yeah, I mean, I'm not in love with that, but it's still not a bad strap, honestly. If I owned this watch, I would probably leave it as is. It's different. It might grow on you, I guess is what I'm getting at, so give it a chance. It does have this really nice rich blue contrast stitching, and in this bright light on my camera here, it's pretty noticeable, but in person, it's much more subtle. I don't think you're going to notice the dark blue contrast stitching as much, but yeah, it is not solid black stitching. The stitching, the quality is quite good though. I don't see any off or strange stitches or anything. The buckle is, again, this dual button deployant buckle. I love these kinds of buckles. I wish all of my leather straps had these. It's highly polished, signed with the Seiko name or logo there. You push the two buttons on the side and it opens up. You can see that the swing arm is not that cheap stamped stainless steel that you get on a lot of Seiko's watches, like their dive watches in particular. This is a nice machined, solid swing arm. The blades are very sturdy, very decent quality. And, to resize it, of course, it's very simple. You just push those little buttons to fold open the lever, and you can pull out the little, I don't know what you call this, the nub, and, put it into whatever hole you want, push it down, close that back up. And to, use it, it's real simple. You just feed the strap through the keepers and give it a little push to lock it down. It's a great little system. I love this style of buckle on leather straps like this. So if I was going to change out this strap because I didn't like how glossy it was or what it looked like, I would at least try to cannibalize this buckle and put it on whatever strap I was going to replace it with. An excellent, outstanding watch. I'll jump back over to my studio view and give you guys my closing thoughts on it. But yeah, I'm happy to have had it on loan and review this version of the Cocktail Time. It's an outstanding watch. So what do I think about this SRPB43 in particular as compared to the previous Cocktail Time generation, the SARB065? Well, this is an equally nice watch, and there's a lot to like about it. I still have the minor complaint that I feel, though, as if the watch is a little too big. At a case diameter of 40.5 millimeters for a dress watch, it's just a little on the large size for me. I would prefer something more in the 36 to 38 millimeter size range. But that's just my personal taste. For a lot of you guys out there, you're going to have no issues with the size whatsoever. Other than that, yeah, the new movement, the 4R series movement instead of the 6R, that is a bit of a negative in my opinion. I think that it's decidedly a downgrade. But for the vast majority of users and consumers, it's going to be a non-issue. And honestly, if this were my watch, if it wasn't a watch that was on loan and I was going to keep it, truth be told, it's probably really not much of an issue for me either. In the back of my mind, I would know that it's a little bit of a lower end movement, and that might leave me with kind of a bad taste in my mouth, I guess. But in truth, it really doesn't matter that much. They're very, very similar movements with only slight differences in the specifications between the two. So that's not a big deal. Aside from those little, minor complaints, and the size one, I guess that's really not minor. It's a little bigger than I would prefer. It is a great watch. It's absolutely beautiful, frankly. The dial, which everybody loves, that radiant sunburst kind of dial. I don't know if it's sunburst is the correct way to describe it, but regardless, it's stunning for sure. The little tiny changes to the dial over the previous generation, not really much of an issue for me. I can hardly tell the difference, but if I were to, examine it up close, I can see that there are some minor changes. It's a little curious. Why did they change things like the markers on what is essentially an identical watch to the previous generation? I don't have the answer to that. And from what I know, Seiko's never come out and said, here's why we made these little tiny changes here and there. The crown being another one. Why is this crown a little bit different than the previous one? It's a little bit oversized, and I guess it doesn't really matter. Again, do I prefer the smaller crown? Yeah, on a dress watch, I'd probably prefer a smaller, more understated, low profile, or refined crown if I had the choice. But this crown isn't bad. It's not an issue. So, yeah, again, it's an outstanding watch. It's high quality. I think that the price point is pretty good, particularly for a quote-unquote Presage line watch. There's really not a whole lot to hold against it or to complain about. So, yeah, I would recommend this watch. If it was between this or going back and finding the old SARB version, which would I do? I hadn't really thought about that until just now. Would I seek out one of the older generation, previously discontinued models over this one? Probably not. I think that they're so close that there's really no reason to go secondhand unless you could find it for a really good price. If you could find a used SARB 065 for an outstanding price versus getting this new one, the SRB43, yeah, I guess I would go for it in that case and, save the money. But otherwise, I'd be more than happy to get this new one and not feel like I was missing out on anything too terribly much. So there you have it, guys. That's my overall opinion, my review, and kind of my second look at the Seiko Cocktail Time. I hope you enjoyed this video. As always, down in the notes or the description section of this video is a list of ways that you can help me out, be it joining my social media pages, supporting me on Patreon, or even loaning me watches for review. All of those things. I really appreciate when you guys reach out to me for those things. So yeah, go down there and check that stuff out. And I'll be back later on next week, probably early next week, with another review video. Have a good one. Take care.